All right, this is our first one on integers and absolute value. This should be a review of kind of what we did in 6th grade. So some vocabulary to begin with. First we have positive and negative integers. A positive integer is an integer that is greater than 0. So it's larger than 0. So that could be something like 1, it could be 7, it could be 723, any number that is a positive number that is greater than 0 or to the right of 0 on the number line. A negative integer is going to be the opposite. It is less than 0. Basically, we know it's negative because we have our negative sign. So -1, -2, -35, -4,987. Anything that's a negative number, anything that's less than 0. Then we have absolute value. And you might remember this from last year. It's these vertical lines around a number. That means absolute value. And absolute value is simply this. It's the distance a number is from 0. We just want to know how many steps would it take to get from that number back to 0. So what we're really measuring is the distance it is away from 0, which means it's always going to be a positive number. Distance is always positive. So you're not just switching the sign. Absolute value is always a positive number because it's how far it is from 0. I don't care if I walk left, I don't care if I walk right, up or down. I'm counting my steps, not what direction I happen to go. So when I see those bars around the number, I'm asking myself, how far is -6 away from 0? Well, -6 is 6 steps away from 0. What's the absolute value of 8.2? Meaning how far is my number away from 0? It's 8.2 steps away. What's the absolute value of -3/4? Meaning how far is -3/4 away from 0? Well, it is 3/4 away from 0. Down here at the bottom, the absolute value of -3. Well, -3 is 3 steps away from 0. And 3 is 3 steps away from 0. So notice they both have the same absolute value, +3 and -3, because they are opposites. They're the same distance from 0, just in opposite directions. One's on the left, one's on the right, but they both have the same absolute value. Absolute value in order of operations. Absolute value should be treated like parentheses. Basically, absolute value is a type of parenthesis or a type of grouping symbol. Therefore, you should always evaluate absolute value first before moving on to the rest of the problem. So think of absolute value as kind of like parentheses. You got to do inside the parentheses first, and then you take care of everything else on the outside. So here, I'm in my absolute value, so I got to do the problem first. 8 plus 3 is 11. Now it's still an absolute value, so now I ask, how far is it away from 0? 11 is 11 steps away from 0. Again, in the absolute value first, 5 times 4 is 20. Everything else stays the same. The absolute value of 20 is 20. It's 20 steps away from 0. 20 plus 3 is 23. Here, in the absolute value first, the absolute value of -9 is 9. Because -9 is 9 steps away. But now, I want the negative. Or another way of thinking about the negative is it means it wants the opposite. I want the opposite of the absolute value of -9. So I want the opposite of 9. Well, that's -9. Down here, absolute value of -16 is 16. Absolute value of -12 is 12. Then I come back and do the problem, and I get an answer of 28. So you do everything in the absolute value first, then you take care of the rest of the math, of the rest of the steps in the problem.